When you work in youth ministry, quite often you take weekend trips. And there was a particular Friday morning that we were getting ready to go on a weekend trip. And so typically on these mornings, on a Friday morning, I will get up and try to get things done around the house, take off some errands, whatever I can, because I know I'm going to be gone all weekend. And on this particular Friday morning, I walked out of my garage and I got in my truck. And I realized, forgot something. I don't even remember what it was I forgot, because in the moment that I started to step back out of my truck, I looked up, and right beside my garage door, I had a picture for you, but it's not working today, was this big, massive raccoon right beside the garage door. And I just immediately stopped in my tracks. And I looked, and I thought, I just walked by that. Am I willing to do that again? And immediately, the first thing that came to my mind whenever I was about to take my next step that made me stop again was, do you remember that scene in Elf whenever he's walking from the North Pole to go to New York City, and he comes up to a raccoon, and he's like, hey, look at you. And then what happens next? The raccoon jumps up and starts attacking him. That was immediately the first thing I thought of when I was trying to get out of my truck. And so I was like, you know what? I don't think it's that important. So I just shut my door and I drive off. And as I leave, I'm thinking, maybe when I get back, it'll just be gone. No big deal. So I go and do what it is I need to do, and I come back, still there. It had made its way closer to the porch this time. So I open the garage door, and I run in. I don't walk, I run in, and I'm sitting there contemplating, okay, what am I going to do with this? Well, the immediate thought I had was, I could do nothing and just hope for the best. But then I got to looking up at what all raccoons can do whenever they stay around your house. And here's what I found about these guys. If you let a raccoon stay around your house, they can mess with your insulation, your wiring, your drywall, your air ducts, while also causing fire and health hazards. And not to mention, they're fully capable of attacking and biting anybody in their presence. And they're super smart and very curious. So even whenever you think your house is protected, they might find a way in somehow, some way. I was like, ooh. Well, I called pest control, and I didn't know at what point they would be able to do it. They didn't seem to indicate they could get over there quickly, and the cost was going to be outrageous for them to come over. Then I thought, well, I'm leaving, so I could leave and let my wife handle it, but that really didn't seem like a good option. I really liked the do nothing option, but here's the thing, even though that sounded like the easiest option and the best option at first, it did not make sense to follow through with it, knowing what could potentially happen. So I tried to think through this, and I just called a family member, and he came over and he helped me take care of the situation. But what if I would have really went with the do nothing option? Well, there's no telling what the results or the consequences would have been. I mean, it's not guaranteed that stuff would have happened. But it also just didn't make sense, knowing what could happen, to just do nothing at all. That just didn't make a lot of sense. But on the flip side of that, it did feel good to actually be proactive and just take care of the situation. There was a sense of peace in that, knowing that it was taken care of, and that I could just go on this trip and not have to worry about anything else. The whole idea of to do something or to do nothing is a dilemma that we seem to find ourselves in a lot of ways on a daily basis. We have these wrestling matches, don't we? To do something or to do nothing. And there's many different battles that come along with that and how we try to reason through those. And this same situation is going to be presented in a parable that Jesus is going to tell. If you want to open up to Matthew chapter 25, we're going to take a look at this parable, and it's going to start in verse 14. It's the parable of the talents. And I would venture to say that a lot of you have read this parable over and over, or you've heard a lesson over this parable, but there's some interesting things that take place in this parable. And to get us an understanding of why Jesus even tells this parable in the first place, if you go back to Matthew chapter 24, he just gets done talking about the destruction of the temple and also the fact that he's going to leave, but he will also return one day. Well, you could imagine that the questions that might come into the disciples' mind if you're one of them in this situation, because if your master or if your Lord or if your leader tells you, hey, I'm leaving, but I'll be back one day, you might have some questions that come into your mind and say, well, if you're gone, what do I do until you get back? Or you might ask, how does him leaving return the way that I think and feel now? Or perhaps you might say, how should I just respond to the fact that he is leaving, but yet he's also telling me he's returning? So you have these questions, and now you've got to figure out, what are you going to do in this situation when it actually happens, when it comes to fruition? And so he starts telling these parables back to back that are going to answer these type questions that not only they would have, but anybody would have if Jesus is going to leave. And like I said, the PowerPoint's not working, so we're just going to dig in here in the text. In verse 14, it says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents. And likewise he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought the 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also, who had received 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you delivered me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. But his Lord answered and said to him, You wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. So we have a master who is going to be leaving for a period of time. Sounds like a familiar situation here. But eventually this master is going to return. And so upon leaving, he's going to entrust these 3 servants with these talents. Now I tried to look up what a talent was, and you get different answers depending on which source you look up, but the common denominator is a talent was a lot of money. It was very valuable. So he's not just giving them some, chump change or anything like that. He was entrusting with them with something that had a lot of value to it. And so upon doing so, it appears that when you're reading through this, that he had expectations of them to actually do something with what he was entrusting them with. So the question becomes, will they do something or will they do nothing? And even though we have 3 servants listed here, really you can just boil it down to 2 sides. You've got the 2 faithful and the 1 unfaithful. You got 2 options. And so what if we just discussed each side one at a time so we can try to figure out the difference, starting with the faithful servants. Essentially what they did was they took what was given to them and they made investments. We're familiar with the term investment. We do this all the time. People make investments in their IRAs. They make investments in a retirement, a 401k, you name it. People make investments in their diets and their exercises. Why? Because they want better returns later on their health. People make investments in businesses that are starting up. Why? Because they hope that by making the sacrifice at the start, they'll get even greater returns later. Something will be produced from it. People invest in real estate. And most of us, we make investments in our leisure activities, our hobbies, and our sports. We put in a lot of effort and time and sacrifice and energy. Why? Because we want the reward of having something accomplished and to see what it produces as we keep doing it. So this idea of investment is something that we do this all the time. And most of the time, it's a calculated, smart decision to take something of value, to weigh it out, and to say, yes, I'm going to go for this. What would have been their motivation for doing this? They knew that eventually their master was going to come back. That was their motivation. And if in this parable, the master obviously represents Jesus, and he's coming back, what blessings and resources have been given or entrusted to us to invest in with our spiritual lives? Could we say time? Could we say money? Could we say our energy that we have? Could we say all the different abilities that each person has to be capable of going and doing different things on a daily basis? Or most importantly, the gospel itself, which when you take the gospel in full measure, it just keeps on producing something. And the opportunities are endless. And similar to these servants, these items that we just talked about, none of these things actually belong to us. Your time's not yours. Your money's not yours. Your abilities aren't yours. They were something that was given to you by the master. You've been entrusted with these things, so what you choose to do with those things, to do something or nothing, is up to us. Is up to us. As a matter of fact, the only thing in this life that we can actually claim as ours is our own sins. That's the only thing we can take ownership over. The rest of it, the rest of this stuff that we have that's been given to us, that's the master and his doing in our lives despite our sins. And so if we're comparing the servants, what about this third servant on the other side? He took the money that was entrusted to him, he hid it, and he protected it. You know, the first time I ever read this, I thought, well, that's not too bad, is it? I mean, he just took care of it, I guess. He protected it. And did he necessarily do anything wrong with the money? Well, no, he didn't necessarily do anything wrong with the money. So what was the problem? What was the issue? The issue is that while the other two were doing something, he did nothing. He was condemned for what he didn't do. That was the issue. And I remember different points in my life growing up as a Christian that it's like I had this mindset of, if I'm going to be a good Christian, I've got to try not to do bad. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. And if I could go through my day with as little sin as possible, then I must be doing pretty good at this whole Christianity thing. And then, apart from that, I could show up to church or church events and allow that to make up for whatever I was missing. Which, don't get me wrong, avoiding sin and going to church is great. It's what we're called to do. It's what we're supposed to do. But what was I doing as a Christian that was good? Try not to do bad, go to church, try not to do bad, go to church, repeat over and over and over. And this is the mentality I carried with me. But was I actually doing something as a Christian? Was I out there serving? Was I out there reaching people? Was I making others around me better? Was I truly being a light? Was I being different and standing out and apart from people that God's called me to be? Was I bringing glory to God's name? Was I actually growing? Or was I producing something other than self-righteousness and religious activity? This is what I wrestled with. And it just seems that whenever we're in these dilemmas, these battles on a daily basis of, do I do something or do nothing? It is so much better to take that safe and comfortable and convenient route. And it seems way easier to make the decision that I'm just not going to worry about it and I'm just not going to do it, as opposed to actually doing something. And Jesus, when he approached him, he called him wicked and he called him lazy. He took what was valuable from the master and he hid it and he did nothing. How many people are taking the gospel filled with all these blessings, all these resources, all this value in their life that's been given to them, and all they're doing is they're hiding it in the church pews? And one day, when the master comes back, all they have to show for it is attendance, fear, and laziness. And that's it. And so when you look at the difference between these two servants, we had the two who did something and the one who chose to do nothing. But here's the thing. We've got to go a little further than this. Because my next question then becomes, why did this difference happen in the first place? Why did the two do something, and why did the other guy do nothing? What's the difference? What is it about these guys that caused the difference in the first place? Well, let's just reread their interactions real quick. So if you go back to Matthew 25 and you go down to verse 20, these are the two. These are the two that did something. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you rule over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also, who had received 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Based on this interaction, this is a very wonderful interaction. It's filled with joy. It's filled with reward. It's filled with positivity. It's exciting. This is built on some sort of wonderful relationship between the servant and the master that when I read that, I want part of that. Well, let's look at the other interaction. Verse 24. Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid, and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. But his Lord answered and said to him, You wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. And yet, when you look at this interaction, it's filled with fear. It's filled with dread. It's filled with all this unpleasantness. You've got 2 totally different interactions when you get to these guys interacting with their master after he comes back. Doesn't it seem like the relationship just looked different between the first 2 and their master and the third and that master? Their dynamic was completely different from each other. So here was the big difference. The big difference on why they did something, he did nothing, is this right here. It was how they viewed their master. The way that you view Jesus as your master, who is gone but will return one day, will determine how you choose to respond to him right now, regardless of when that return will be. Based on the interaction of the first 2 servants, our master isn't a hard taskmaster like the third servant implied, but it's a relationship dynamic that is built in joy. And when you understand the type of relationship and connection that it actually is and that it can be, the potential that comes with it, it will change your mindset and how you see him and view him and know him and what you choose to do right now. And it's as if this relationship dynamic, it grew between the master and servants because of how well they invested in what they were given. The master gave them something of precious value. They saw the value in it, and they went and did something with it. And so this relationship dynamic was starting to grow because of it. And it's like they were looking forward to the master coming back so they could just show him what all they had done. They were so proud. They were filled with joy, and they couldn't wait. Their service led to a better relationship, which then led to more production and growth, which then led to more service, which then led to more production and growth. And it just keeps on keeping on. However, if the view you have of Jesus isn't who he actually is and what he actually wants and expects of you, then it too will affect how you live right now, just like the third servant. 2 different reactions and responses to the master based on 2 different views of who they thought he was. Our master wants the best for us and everyone around us. And that best is capable of happening when we take what's been given to us and we do something with it. Even Jesus told the third servant after their interaction, he said, you could have at least taken it to the bank. In other words, he could have at least done something other than nothing. There is a true joy that comes into play when we humbly serve our master that then compels you to keep on reaching for it. And by doing nothing, you miss out on every bit of it. So that whenever you see Jesus one day, you're terrified of him. And there's nothing to show for it. There was a situation that happened one time that I went through a serious wrestling match. Do I do something or do I do nothing? And I feel like this situation was so relatable in many of these spiritual interactions that take place. I had been praying, all right, God, I want you to help me. I know the opportunities are going to be there. I just need you to help me to see them better. And not only when I see those opportunities, I need you to help me have the strength and the courage to go after these opportunities. Because it's one thing to see the opportunity, right? But then when the opportunity's there, then you got to make the choice. Do I do something with it or do I do nothing? So this is what I've been praying for a while. And years ago, I was sitting in my office over at the Willow Avenue congregation. And one of the things that we tried to do, the ministers tried to do, was if we wanted to take a lunch break or if we needed to go somewhere, then we wanted to make sure that there was at least one minister in the office with the secretary so she wouldn't have to be by herself. And so I got up one day, and I was getting ready to go eat lunch. And I got a few steps, got too close to my doorway, and I realized that I was the only minister there, and the secretary would have been by herself. So I was like, you know what? I'll just wait. So I went and sat back down. No sooner had I sat down than I heard the front door open, and some random lady comes walking into the office, and she's looking for a preacher or a minister to talk to. Well, I'm the only one there, and so she comes in, she sits down, and basically she says to me, she says, my son is in the jail right now, and I'm looking for somebody to please go and reach out to my son and talk to him. And so I wrote his name down, and here's what went through my mind. She leaves, and here's what's going through my mind. I had a choice to make. Do I do something or do I do nothing? And see, internally, this was out of my comfort zone. And I remember sitting there and I was thinking to myself, okay, I do not want to do this. I don't feel like doing this. This is actually really inconvenient for what I was about to go do. This is going to mess up my plans. And I started thinking, how could I possibly find a way to divert this to someone else or just get out of it altogether? And as I'm wrestling through all this, it hit me. And I stopped right there, and I said to myself, now Chase, you've been praying for weeks that not only will God give you opportunities, but that you will see them and that you will do something about them. And if that's what you're going to pray, then how come when an opportunity comes, you're just going to keep finding a way to get out of it and do nothing with it? This is the conversation I'm having with myself, and I said, I'm going to do it. And so I drive over to the jail, and I go through the process. And I go and hit the intercom, and I ask for the guy's name. Well, here's the thing. He doesn't know who I am. And so he tells me no. He doesn't want to see me. Well, so then I was like, all right, well, I did my part. No big deal. I did it. I tried, whatever. But then I go back, and I'm like, now, come on. You can't just quit there. So I wrote the guy a letter. I sent it to the jail, telling him who I was. I talked about his mom. And then the mom also got a hold of him and explained to him. And so I go back. And he says yes. And so we sit down in that little seat, and there's a glass there, and we talk on the phone or whatever, and we start talking, and it leads to a Bible study, and lo and behold, he gets baptized, becomes a Christian. In the process of doing this, he tells another inmate. So then I'm meeting with another inmate, and we start studying the Bible together, which then leads to another inmate. We start studying the Bible together, which then leads to another inmate, start studying. And then when this guy gets out, he starts coming to church with me. And I look back at all this, and I think about this dilemma and these wrestling matches that we have, especially when we don't feel like it, we don't want to, it's out of our comfort zone. That day, I had a choice, do something or do nothing. By doing something, look at what all transpired. And if I would have done nothing, look at what all would have been missed. It was an investment that produced way more than I thought it was ever going to produce. And that's the point. Our Master has entrusted us with the most valuable things our life could possibly take on. And if we, who have been entrusted, will put those into action and invest in those, then the production and growth that comes from that will always go far beyond what you ever thought it would. So for those of us this morning who are servants of our Master, Jesus Christ, He will return one day. So to answer the questions that were prompted earlier with the parable on what do I do now until He returns, I take the gospel that saved me and all the blessings that come with it, and I do something with it all the time. For those of us who are not servants of the Master, Jesus Christ, He will return one day. So to answer the question that was prompted earlier with the parable, and what do I do now until He returns? You answer the gospel call to repent and put Christ on in baptism, just like they did in Acts chapter 2, so that you can become a servant of the most wonderful Master you could ever have. Then you take all the blessings that come with that, and you do something with it all the time. As much as people like to invest in all different kinds of things in the world, this investment right here trumps them all. So the question that we could ask ourselves as we close this out is, what am I going to do? If there's anything we can do to assist anybody this morning, would you please come while together we stand and sing.